Okay, I've never used one of these, sorry. Comparing your personal experiences as a refugee and a Holocaust survivor with the current refugee situation in the UK, what changes have you seen in both political and public attitudes, and what do you think have been the most significant factors in driving these changes?
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not a Holocaust survivor. I escaped the Holocaust. I escaped the Holocaust. There are people who've survived, and they've been through much worse experiences than me, so I must be careful. Okay? Okay. So, what's the difference? Well, first of all, public opinion. Even then, there was some hostility, and as I said earlier, Britain was the only country that took Kindertransport children pretty well in Europe. Americans wouldn't either. So, but, you know, the number was finite. That's to say, they were coming, and then the war came, and that was basically the end of it. But I think there has been much more hostility since then. In the immediate post-war period, you know, the Western countries were accepting of Hungarian refugees and others, and then gradually hostility began to develop. And then when governments started being hostile, of course, as there are some now, it became more difficult. So the climate of opinion is much harder. Numbers are larger, but you know, in relation to inward migration, and European countries all need people in the job market, at least I don't know about Switzerland, but they certainly do in the UK. There are places that just can't function without workers coming in, and of course with Brexit, that stopped the easy supply of people from some European countries. So I think it's become a much more political issue. It's become a much more controversial issue, and it's hard to manage. And I think we've got to be very careful how to do it. And I think we have to keep committing to human rights, keep committing to decent standards, and say there are some international conventions which protect asylum seekers and refugees, and we have to make sure they're adhered to. And we have to resist the far-right governments who are trying to exploit the situation for their own cynical political ends.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just challenge you with a bit of specificity here. So you've spoken about sort of this need to diffuse political tensions and to shift attitudes. How can public opinion be shifted? How can this actually be achieved? What is the role of legal instruments? So you've mentioned, for example, conventions, the Geneva Convention, European Convention on Human Rights, and you also spoke of a need for a European-wide agreement. But how could this actually be reached, given the current political climate?
Well, okay. Well, very difficult indeed. The current political climate is more hostile to this than it would have been some years ago. So, you know, I can say what I'd like to happen, but we've got to keep persevering at trying to get some Europe-wide agreement. I think we have to share responsibility for asylum seekers. We can't expect the Germans to take 1 million from Syria, much to Angela Merkel's disadvantage in the end, but we can't do that. I think we have to share responsibility and share standards, provided they are human rights compliant standards. So I think we have to do that. And I think we have to have voices which say asylum seekers are vulnerable fellow human beings who deserve better. There's no way we can force it. We're not going to make Viktor Orban in Budapest change his views, it seems to me, particularly as he's getting support from Donald Trump. But I think it's a challenge to the politicians and political parties and governments, particularly of Western Europe, as to whether we can move forward. And if we don't, we'll all suffer. So, you know, there isn't an easy answer. There's no formula that will make it all happen. But I think we at least have to say the right way forward is through international agreement. This is why Brexit is such a disaster. At the moment, for a time, Britain had the least stable government in Europe under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. But now I think we've got a more stable government compared to the volatile situation in Germany and France and Italy and Netherlands and Denmark and so on. So Britain could be possibly more influential. But of course we don't quite have the clout simply because we're not in the EU. Nevertheless, I think we should try and do that, because the agreement we need should cover more than just EU membership. It should cover Europe generally. And I think we just have to persevere and say, this is what we believe in, this is how we set our sights. And I think we should say, by the way, in France, we should say, if I was British government, I'd go to Paris and have another go at having a better agreement with the French. And I think what the elements would be, I'd say, look, let us together identify those asylum seekers who are in Calais who actually have some family connections with the UK, or some connection with the UK through education or through family. And let's just take those. And on condition the French are then tougher with the others. The problem is, if I can just go back to stage to your question, the problem is that some of the ones I met in Calais, there were many Afghans and Sudanese on my last visit, and what the NGOs working with them, hard pressed, said the conditions were very, very difficult, there wasn't enough food and so on. But what they said was that if an asylum seeker entered in Greece and Italy and they were fingerprinted, then it was very difficult for them to claim asylum in France. And the reason they were going to Calais is because it didn't stop them claiming asylum in Britain. So paradoxically, it's a Brexit situation that's made it more difficult for Britain, and more refugees have been coming over. But I think we've got to have a better agreement with the French. It's just untenable. The other thing the NGOs working in Calais said to us, nobody's giving these people any advice. You know, they're just coming because they say the UK is a good place to go to. Now, it may be it is the best for them, it may be it's not. But at the moment, it's a very unsatisfactory situation when a lot of them just think, well, we'll go to the UK in the hope that it'll be better, and often it won't be.
You mentioned Brexit a couple times. How do you see it as having come about, and how would you like to see the UK reconciling it in the future? And what do you think can realistically be done, considering Starmer has declared Britain will not rejoin the EU in his lifetime?
Well, look, first of all, I hope Starmer will change his mind. First of all, I think Brexit is a complete disaster. Let me say, I probably knocked on more doors campaigning for Remain than anybody you've met. Okay, I counter offer, but and I did it day after day, and knocked on doors and so on. But I was in West London, and West London was largely a Remain area. But I still predicted that we were going to lose, because to use the old jargon, the white working class that were in the area I was knocking on doors, they tended to be Brexiteers. And there were more of them outside London than in London, so it didn't all go well. But look, that Brexit referendum was a political disaster of the first order. Having a referendum, instead of setting a threshold and say, to make a major change in our constitution, it should have been 60%, not 1% or 2%. It was a complete failure as to how to change our relationship with our main trading partner with the rest of the EU. So it was a complete failure, brought about by, I think, helped significantly by Boris Johnson. Probably one of the most dishonest politicians in the world. And that's a big statement. And then Liz Truss, anyway. I mean, it's difficult to believe we had two such awful people as Prime Minister. But he did it, and Boris Johnson apparently had two articles written, one supporting Remain and one supporting Leave. Yes. And he decided in the end that he would publish the one saying Leave. And it was unbelievable. I think David Cameron, as Prime Minister, made a mistake in having the referendum. It was all done to solve the internal problems of the Tory party. He thought that he would win the referendum easily. But I repeat, we should have had a threshold, because to make such a major decision on the basis of a 52-48 vote is hardly the way to achieve such dramatic political change. Most countries, when they change their constitutions, have a threshold. So it was an example of one misstep after another, one bit of mishandling after another. Look, I think we should move back to the customs union and the single market. I think we should do it in steps. I think the government will do it in the end. But I think the present government is nervous lest any challenge might be interpreted as trying to undermine the result of the referendum. The referendum never said we shouldn't be in the common market, in the single market or the customs union. The referendum didn't say that, but it was assumed that had to go with it. So it was an example of one dramatically awful political decision after another. Hard to put them all together and say this was a coherent, stable democracy behaving so awfully. Sorry, I can't give you a better answer, but I'm optimistic. First of all, I was talking to someone in Starmer's office, and I said, look, all this stuff, and she said, well, there's a problem with people challenging them about the referendum. I said, look, the old people have all died, the ones who supported Brexit. There's a new generation of younger ones. And anyway, the population as a whole has changed. There's now a belief that it was a mistake. So I think we should accept the view. It'll happen. It won't happen immediately, but it'll happen. If the Europeans will have us. The other point is, they'll say, well, why should we have you lot? You were pretty awful. De Gaulle said initially, Britain is not right, the attitudes are different, wrong. And I think we'd have a job persuading them to get us, to accept us and to get as good a deal with the EU as we had before. So there's a long way ahead. Not in my lifetime, but in yours.
Sorry, thank you. You've had definitely a few criticisms of the previous government there. So was your reaction to the recent opinion polls that have emerged showing that the new Labour government is already dropping below the opinion polls for the Tory party?
Well, look, first of all, look, I buy my own suits, okay? I go to the optician, I get my own glasses and so on, and there's a friend of mine, and they said, well, nobody bought your suit. It's so scruffy. Anyway, look, a little bit. First of all, there was no public money involved. These were all gifts by people to other people. So it wasn't like the Tories. The Tories, under COVID, they gave a contract to one of their people for millions and millions of pounds for equipment, which was dud for their health, masks and things for the health service. Absolutely. And they did that, and they seemed to get away with it. That was public money. This was all private money. These are some people, friends of Keir Starmer, saying, I'll buy you a decent suit or something. No, it shouldn't have happened. Politically, it's damaging. And yes, a newly elected government doesn't expect to be popular. The time to be unpopular is to make the difficult decisions immediately, compounded by, I think, lack of good staff work. I think if the people like Jonathan Powell and Alistair Campbell, who were with Tony Blair, and Tony Blair wanted to get a suit done, he'd have said, forget it, Tony, just go away. Don't do it. Now, there was nobody apparently in Starmer's office who said, don't do it. So it was an example of a monumental cock-up, frankly, and it shouldn't have happened. It's damaging, but I don't believe that public opinion. There are different ways about some social security things, and unfortunately, look, I tell you my private view is, this obsession with not increasing income tax. I personally would like to see a little bit more of an increase in income tax, at least for the better off, increase in income tax, hypothecated for health and social care. And if you say to people, not we're going to increase your tax just because we're going to do it, but we're going to increase your tax for a specific purpose. I know the Treasury doesn't like it, but for a specific purpose, then I think the public would buy it. And then but now we're trying to find, our Chancellor's got to find ways in the budget in 2 weeks' time of actually raising enough money to cover the terrible deficit left to us by the Tories. We're saying the Tories left our finances in a terrible situation. Well, they did. They always say, if we mention it. But the fact is, it's true. They just made commitments which were not funded and which we have to deal with. So, we've had to deal with that. And yes, it's unpopular. We'll get back to popularity.
You received a life peerage to the House of Lords in 1994, and you're currently serving as a member. So, concerning the long-standing debates on the nature of this body, do you see a future in the House of Lords, and where would you like to see the situation go?
Okay, future of the House of Lords. Well, look, when I first got to the Lords, the large number were hereditary. And the idea that people should be in the legislative chamber because many generations before somebody had been a friend of the King's or whatever it is completely undemocratic and ridiculous. I personally believe the House of Lords should be elected. We have to find a way of giving the Commons supremacy or primacy so that we don't get a deadlock between two chambers. Because, of course, if we were fully elected, then we would have more political muscle than being an appointed second chamber. But I don't think it's right that people should be appointed in democracy. And the reason is accountability. If you're elected in any... I know the Swiss have a system of referenda, and that's an interesting development. We're not good at referenda in Britain, by the way. I wish we could learn from you as to how to do it so well, or you, the Swiss. But anyway, the House of Lords. So I once spent the day canvassing the parliamentary by-election for the Commons, and I came back in the evening to Lords, and I thought to myself, I've been subjected all day on the doorstep to arguments about health, education, planning, housing, transport, all that. These people have been sitting here all day. They're not subjected to that. And when I was a member of Parliament in the Commons, I had to answer for what I did, both to my local Labour Party and also to my constituency. And there's no such accountability. And then there is the argument about expertise. Oh, we've got experts in the Lords. Well, one of the foremost neurologists some years ago in the Lords said to me, look, this argument about expertise, you're only an expert for the first 2 years after you've left your field. After that, you're out of date anyway. But more importantly, why should the foremost expert in neurology or the foremost expert in nuclear physics, why should he or she be any better than we are about unemployment, housing, healthcare, social care, and all the other policies? Why should they don't? And the experts only come in for the thing they're experts on. And I think a democratic legislature should have experts to advise it rather than to be comprised of experts. So I think we should have an elected second chamber. We should make sure, either in standing orders or in a written constitution, if we could get to that, that in the end of a conflict of supremacy for the Commons, but in the meantime, let's have an accountable elected second chamber. May I say, my view is not accepted by most people in the Lords. Surprise, surprise.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So just to shift the tone back towards humanitarian issues and away from politics briefly, you touched upon the Good Friday Agreement. So what would you say are the main takeaways from this agreement? How is it realized? What can we learn from it? And how can the lessons from it maybe be applied to current conflicts? So for example, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and reconciling the division between these two groups.
I think translating directly the experiences of one successful peace process elsewhere is pretty difficult. It just doesn't work like that. But there are elements which might be useful. But look, let me restate that. British governments have tried to tackle the situation for a long time. By the way, the history goes back to the last person who understood all about this was Gladstone, I think. And after that, British governments successively ducked the issue and didn't deal with the sectarian divide in Ireland and so on. And it was a tragedy, and it was unnecessary. Anyway, so British governments tried to achieve compromises, and the last compromise was Northern Ireland's mainly Protestant, and the Republic is mainly Catholic, and so on. Although, in the event, things have moved on so much, and the really strong Catholic influence on governments in Ireland, in Dublin, is gone now. So the world has changed. Anyway, what we had, though, which was crucial, was the 100% support of the Irish government. Bertie Ahern, who was a Taoiseach most of the time, he was totally committed to a peace process. The Irish government was, the EU was, Americans were, and the British government, Tony Blair made his first major speech, as I was saying, supporting the idea of a peace process. And then there were changes in the Sinn Féin, the IRA. They'd realised that they weren't going to win. They weren't going to lose, but they weren't going to win. There had to be a different way forward. All these things combined. Now, if you take other areas, what you'd have to do, at the moment there is a total unwillingness, I think, on the part of Netanyahu to go for a ceasefire. And also there's a total unwillingness on the part of Netanyahu to accept a Palestinian state. I think the tragedy of October the 7th is terrible for Israel, absolutely shocking. And I think Israel will be traumatized for many generations by that terrible experience. On the other hand, 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, probably 2,000 Lebanese. It's happening on the West Bank. So there are awful things happening, but there has to be a willingness. Now look, one of the things, I was in a meeting with 6 Arab ambassadors about a week ago, and the Jordan ambassador said that at the UN, the Jordan position has been made clear that there are, I don't know what it is, 47 Muslim and Arab countries that provided there is a ceasefire and a Palestinian state, then they are willing to support the guaranteed borders for Israel, the guarantees for Israel that Israel will be safe and alongside a Palestinian state. That seems to be a pretty interesting way forward, and one that's been actually on the table for some time, but it was repeated at the United Nations just recently. But Netanyahu won't have it. He's surrounded by some extreme ministers, and he just won't have it. Look, I've got Jewish background. I mean, I feel pain for the people of Israel because I think Netanyahu is making their life much more dangerous, much more precarious, and the other thing that Netanyahu is doing is I think he's fostering anti-Semitism all over the world, and I think he's a lot to answer for. So but unless there is some change in Israel, I don't see how we can negotiate. They were Biden thought the Americans had got them near to peace process, but Netanyahu decided not to do it. We were very close to it some months ago. So I just think there has to be more pressure on the Israeli government to achieve peace. You cannot eradicate Hamas with the civilian population. You cannot eradicate Hezbollah the way they're entrenched. You can kill individuals, but you can't actually stop the idea. And I think what we've got to do is to undermine Hamas and Hezbollah by showing that there is a future for the Palestinians, not dependent upon the terrorist tactics of Hamas and Hezbollah, but depend upon international agreement that there should be a Palestinian state speaking up for Palestinians, not as the outcome of negotiations, but now in order to achieve the negotiations.
Thank you very much.
One last question, Katerina.
I mean, we can close here with the closing question that we had, which was a little lighter. Do you have any favorite reads, and what are they?
Favorite?
Reads.
Books.
Yes.
Books. Look, I tell you what, I was speaking at the Hay Book Festival, not because I'd written the book, but because I was talking about refugees some years ago. Oh, sorry, some years ago. Sorry, I was speaking at the Hay Book Festival, not because I'd written the book, but there was a discussion about refugees. And then I got talking to an Irish novelist who teaches at the University of Birmingham. And I bought her book at the end of her talk and got her to sign it. And I said, "You've changed my mind." Up to now, I said to her, "I'm going to start reading novels again." Up to now, I've only been reading worthy books. She drew us up to her full height and very angrily she said, "Novels are worthy books, how dare you?" So I said, "Oh, I meant improving books." Look, I don't know, actually I like Middlemarch, okay? If I can take the easy one. I'm just reading a novel, I've forgotten the name of it, about Ireland and so on. Politics of Ireland, a novel about politics of Ireland. I love John le Carré, but some of them, they're not all good, but John le Carré, if I want an easy bedtime read. And then I was reading a book by John Bolton about his days in the Trump White House. That was heavier going. So the answer is, I wish I had more time. I have to read so many government documents and things. It stops me doing the enjoyable part of life, which is reading books. But in the light of your question, I've got a stack of books this high by my bedside table.
So do I.
Yeah, but they've got to get read as well. And I say most of them are worthy books and not novels. but no, I just think one has to mix one's reading between modern novels, I like political thrillers basically because they're so easy for me. I understand them. But I think all of us spend our time reading fewer government documents and more time reading something which will actually improve our minds.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Mr. Wingate. Wait a minute.
Thank you. Yes, my question is, do you think the electorates in Europe have legitimate concerns about what they perceive as mass migration?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they do, and it's been a failure on the part of the more sensible democratic parties to acknowledge that and come to terms with it. Look, a colleague of mine said some time ago, the probably 1% of GDP in the UK has benefited by inward migration. But the trouble is that the benefits are more to the City of London and the more affluent parts of England, and that the people who are exposed to newcomers coming in with pressure on schools and housing and hospitals and so on, are not getting the benefit. So what we've got to do is to make sure that the benefits of inward migration are actually understood and that they are shared. And we've got to manage this differently. We are not managing the situation properly. Sorry, am I dealing with your question or have I gone on time? Yeah, I just think it's a real challenge as to how we do it. Look, I've been to local areas where there's a commitment to helping newcomers, to helping asylum seekers and refugees of the first order. Fantastic. And then they hear government ministers saying we don't want these people here and so on. And then we see the headlines in the Daily Mail that talk about all these people coming in boats and then implying, and some of them weren't. I mean, I have to say, we had a lot of Albanians who came over, and I don't think they would qualify under the Geneva Convention. So to do it as well, we have to be absolutely clear that if people come and claim asylum, then they have to go through a proper, fair process. And if they qualify, then they're welcome and we should help them. If they don't qualify, they shouldn't stay. Okay? And that is separate from whether we want an immigration policy dealing with labour shortages and so on. So we've got to manage these things better. I hope our Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who I know quite well, I hope that we will do this better. We haven't been doing it very well. Local communities have an enormous part to play in this. And the leadership from the top is influential in helping local communities to either be supportive or to be hostile. And I think we just do it better. And when I mentioned Guy Lineker and football, you know, we need eminent people who are not politicians, who will be supportive of refugees, people from the arts, people from sport and so on. We need people like that, and we need them to speak out locally. And then we get a good local response. So there are real challenges, and there are challenges to national politicians, and there are challenges to local politicians. And in some, we have a concept, maybe you have it here as well. We have yesterday I was talking to University of Sanctuary, and there are local authorities who are boroughs of sanctuary, and they meet certain standards in terms of welcoming asylum seekers, and they influence public opinion in their areas. And I think all these things matter, but it's a big agenda. It's a big agenda. It won't happen automatically because we've got other people working against us, and that's a challenge. Not a very good answer, but you know, it is one of the big challenges facing all West European countries and the United States.
Okay.
How long do you think it will take until the British public is ready to run another referendum to revert Brexit?
Oh, well, thanks for that one. Well, look, I fear. Look, first of all, you know, Keir Starmer was actually a European. I mean, he wasn't a Brexiteer at all. By the way, can I tell you the story before I say it? I was knocking on the doors in what was largely a main area, and there was a young man, Indian man, who said he's going to vote for Leave. And I said, why? And he said, if we stop these Europeans coming in, then more of my friends from India will get to Britain. Which seemed funny, but it's true. It has happened. It's exactly what's happened. Fewer people have come in from the EU countries, and more people have come from India and other countries. So it's had a perverse thing. How are we going to reverse it? Look, I think common sense, I just believe in the end common sense will work. Look, I was talking time of the referendum to somebody in the north of England, okay, a head of a garage. And I said to him, look, you want to leave the EU. Let me tell you this. I can think of 20 things wrong with the EU, but I still believe we should be members. And I said to him, tell me one good thing about the EU. And he couldn't think of one, or he didn't venture anything. And the thing is, these people are not logical people. They're members of a cult, like a religious cult. And you can't argue with people with a cult. I mean, it's like climate change and Donald Trump. You know, if he says climate change doesn't exist, it doesn't exist because he says so. I think we have to be very careful. But I believe that the full logic, and a new generation of young people who want to travel, who want to be able to move around, and want the freedom and study elsewhere, that will happen. I think we'll start making moves at the end of this Parliament, you know, This government probably won't be able to do it, but towards the end of the 4 or 5 years of the life of this Parliament, I think moves will start. I repeat, whether the EU countries will want us or not is another thing. They may say to hell with the Brits, you know, we're fed up with you, you've caused us more problems, and now you want to come back in again. So, you know, we'd have to have another referendum. And although in Switzerland, the Swiss managed to have a referenda, and it's all done very peacefully, and it works very well, we're not good at referendum. In Ireland, if they get the result they don't like, just have another referendum until they get the result they do like. I think that's much more sophisticated, much better way to put it. But we're not good at referendum. We just don't know how to do them properly. You know, I say to people who want independence of Scotland, if you think Brexit is a bad idea, what would happen if Scotland were to become independent? We'd have Brexit multiplied. So I believe it'll be an issue in the next Parliament. Starmer's got to win again, and then it'll be an issue. But I hope I'm alive to see it.
Okay, well, I'll ask you the last question then, Alfie. As a let's just say, as a youthful 91-year-old,
Well, don't keep rubbing it in.
what advice would you give to these young people about action and being activists to try and change things and make things better for all of us as a collective rather than individually?
Well, I think you've all, when you finish school, when you finish at university and so on, you've all got to decide which way you're going. And I think, and I don't want to sound as if I'm preaching, but I think there is a responsibility on all of us to see if we can influence public opinion, influence the way things are done. And there are certain standards of human rights, there are certain standards of treating asylum seekers better. There are certain standards generally which underpin our approach as in Western countries. And I think we've got to make sure we give expression to them. And you know, you can all, every one of you can be an influence. It's not a matter of saying this will happen, but somebody else will do it. Nicky Winton said he would do it. He wasn't let somebody else try and deal with it. Nobody else was there. He said he'd do it. And I think you have a responsibility, you know, but you can decide which way you want to go in life. There are big earnings to be made in the City of London and elsewhere, no doubt here. Big earnings to be made, and you can opt out of these things. Or you can stay part of it and decide that this is what matters, and this will lead to a better world, and I want to play a part in helping it. But you know, I'd say join your local political parties and try and influence them. Try and become members. Look, I didn't think I'd make it to Parliament, and I found myself very surprised when I did. And then I lost my seat, and then they put me in the Lords as consolation. But you know, the fact is, these are all, you know, I never thought I'd have these opportunities. I'm very lucky. And I think you've got to make luck happen as well. You know, aim high and make luck happen. And I don't say you should all become politicians, but at least you should be involved in public affairs and what goes on. And it can be rewarding. I was a local councillor. I found that very rewarding indeed to be a local councillor. And I find it very rewarding being an MP and then in the Lords. So one can do things. But you have to decide what you want to do. The important thing is not just to want to be there, but to say, I want to be there to do something. Just to be there is a recipe for political inertia and for arrogant politicians and so on, which like being there. We don't want those. All we want is people who are there because they believe in something and want to achieve something. And you should help in that process.
Okay, well,